I would love you to introduce yourself, and I'm going to ask you I'm going to throw a few curveball questions at you.
That's not terrifying at all. I will introduce myself. I'm Helen. I manage a team of SEOs at iTech Media, where we manage a portfolio of affiliate websites. I've been in digital marketing for, I'm going to say, about 14 years, but have been specializing in SEO, agency side, client side, and a little bit of freelance recently. So that's my introduction in a nutshell.
What is the best? So I've talked to you before. Love what you have to say. Interesting to hear that you're doing some freelance. So real quick, what is the best way for folks to get in touch with you if they want to talk to you more about that?
I would say the Twitters is probably the best place. I'm at Helen Pollitt 1. There's a load of L's and a load of T's in my surname, so good luck with that.
Just go crazy with it. Add a few extra.
Yeah, all the L's, all the T's, and then a 1 at the end.
Perfect. I do know that icebreakers are social chaos and a little bit torturous, but I have a couple ones that I'm going to ask you anyway. So first one, work-ish. If you had to go back and change your career and you couldn't pick anything in SEO, what would you have chosen to go into?
I would have been a counsellor, as in a therapist. I actually started training to be a therapist at the ripe old age of 19, but found out pretty quickly that no one wants to be counselled by 19-year-olds. So I kind of put that on the back burner and discovered marketing. So that's probably what I would be doing now if I wasn't doing marketing.
Second career, please. Everyone needs therapy, so we are in need. Would like to just advocate for that now. Therapy is the best. All right, second question. If you had to be in any TV show, what would be the premise? I want you to invent your own TV show that I can catch.
Good question. I mean, I'd love to say a day in the life of an SEO, but I'm not sure how much people really want to watch you manipulate data in spreadsheets or update titles. So it's probably not going to be a great premise for a show.
I mean, you underestimate how much people love this stuff. So
that's true, and also how many people will just watch whatever is on screen. So maybe it will be a hit. Maybe I have underestimated the public, and actually this could be the way forward, and we could breed a whole new generation of SEOs who've been brought up on watching this amazing SEO TV show.
Now I feel a little, I don't feel super great about my answer to that, which was something similar to Star Trek, set in space, but a roller derby team. So they can go to me for the comedy relief after that. That's perfect. All right, let's get started. Okay, so reports are really important. I know for me, about a third of my job is education. And a lot of the times what I need to supplement that or to be able to build that cloud is data. So how can we, and data can tell any story. I remember going into statistics and math thinking, fantastic, I am sick of the lies that humans tell. We are very messy. I'll just stick to the numbers. And the most important lesson I got from a statistician is numbers can tell any story I want it to tell. There's not necessarily one truth. And there are complexities in how data is accessed on the back end and how it's gathered. So how can we all ensure that our data is useful and unbiased?
Probably the first point, and I cannot stress this enough, is don't only report on the data that you want your audience to see. And it is so very tempting, especially if you are agency side and you're reporting to clients, to just cherry pick data that tells a good story. But that, at the end of the day, is not honest, it's not truthful, and it's creating bias in our data. So when you are reporting, you have to show the good, the bad, and the ugly. It puts it all in context. And I think we need to be a little bit more reassured that the data that we are sharing has a story behind it. And as SEOs, we can talk around, a downturn in traffic or the fact that leads aren't going the way we want them to go, because we know the overall strategy, we know the bigger picture, and we shouldn't be afraid to share that data with people who perhaps don't necessarily understand it. Because the whole point of our reports and the visualizations that we use is that we are helping to communicate that with them. So that's probably my first point, is share all the data, all the relevant data, not just the stuff you want them to see. And then just things around actually how you maintain your data. So keeping your data source clean is really important. Keeping that data safe. Oftentimes we're reporting from the likes of Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics. If we have a lot of people who have access to that data, filters get put in, segments get changed so you're not necessarily aware of. So actually the data that you think you are reporting on because you set up a particular view or filter months ago may have been changed without you knowing about it. And actually the data has lost some of its integrity. What you are comparing year on year might not actually be the same data. So really keeping an eye on what's happening with your data. Put in whatever checks and measures you need to make sure that your data doesn't change without you knowing about it, but really keeping that data safe and clean. And then probably always linking back to wider business goals. I think we can get a little bit tunnel visioned in terms of only focusing on SEO traffic, SEO goals, the things that we have been working on, the things that we're working towards, but actually we're doing this for a greater reason. We're doing this to impact the bottom line of a company, or we're doing this to get more visibility over a particular cause. We have to always link our data back to those end goals and not just the goals that we've set ourselves as SEOs. Otherwise, we could be saying that we've got a load of traffic to a website. Wonderful, but what's that traffic doing? Is the website the be all and end all actually for this particular business? And if not, we need to put it in that context of what is.
Where do you think SEOs should how should they prioritize taking the data that they have and their own findings and then being able to merge that with the KPIs of the business? Should it be top priority? Should it be something after you've collected the data, trying to fit it and tell that narrative? Where would you place that in the process?
That was a good question. I think it probably needs to fit in at multiple points actually in the process. I think we need to be using that data to inform a lot of decisions at different points. So really making sure the data is available to people when they need it in that process is probably how I would prioritize it.
Gotcha. All right, 2 more questions. What's the risk of only sharing the good stuff? So you say we have to share it all. What have you seen when you've seen situations where they are sharing the good versus all of the data? How does that play out?
I've seen it really bite people in the backside before. So only sharing when traffic's going up, or just cherry picking the pages that you're showing keyword ranking changes for. What happens when you then lose visibility on that particular page, or you lose traffic to a section of the website? You've actually lost all trust because you are only showing the good. But when a downturn happens and you can't hide it anymore because you've been cherry picking that particular statistic for such a long time, you've not really given your audience the reassurance that actually the data that you've been presenting to them is the whole truth. I've seen it before, agency side, where agencies have always shown, for instance, that keywords are improving, keywords are going up in ranking, but actually then when they drop in ranking, suddenly we're not reporting on rankings anymore. And that kind of chopping and changing between the data sets that you're sharing can really lead to a very confusing picture for your end audience. And I think it does really jeopardize the trust that they have in you. It's quite easy to see through. I think that if you're being presented with one set of data one month, but suddenly that data set changes the next month, the question is why. So actually, if you're always reporting all of the data and you're showing the good, the bad, and the ugly, then it gives your audience the ability to question some of that data. We shouldn't be afraid of that. Downturns happen. It could be seasonality, it could be all kinds of things. It could be actually that you need more budget from them, or you need more time and resources allocated to a particular project. We should be able to talk about that, and that data sometimes reinforces those kind of conversations. So the risk is that if you only ever show improvements and then good things happening, that actually you lose out on that opportunity to have some of those tougher conversations that could, in the end, lead to better results and more resource for you.
Yeah. I like that it feels like it can go a longer way to building a trusting relationship that lasts longer than SEO consulting or advocating relationships that can be a little short, right? There's a time where you often outgrow the relationship. I like that period to be a little bit longer. And I think being able to tell both sides can help with that. They feel like they can trust you. All right, I have one more. This might not be from you. If I could just get Google real quick to build a feature in GA, like a nanny bot that tells me when anybody messes with my filters or views or anything on a report that I own, like give me an owner on an individual report level and just tattle on everyone that touches it. I think that would be a good feature. So if they can whip that up really quickly, that'd be fantastic. We'll make sure they credit you. All right, I'm gonna move on to the next slide. Go ahead, Helen, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I was just saying I want a portion of any revenue they make from that, but being that it's Google Analytics, it's probably not going to be much.
Then sure, let's just find something somewhere. I would just take a gift card to a good bakery, right? All right. So, data. I like it. I personally have this habit of getting elbow deep in it and getting excited about all the different data points, but then realizing that I have to zoom way out and I have to show something that is going to be useful in order to get any movement on it. So how do I get there? How do I get from A to B to being, swimming in data points? I work at Deep Crawl. Of course, I have access to a lot of data. So how do I get to that point where I'm collecting it to something that I can then present in an accurate way?
I guess you really need to think about, what does the recipient of your report need to know? What do they care about? What are their KPIs? What are their OKRs? What is it that they are being measured on themselves, and working back from there? Because if you want buy-in for anything, you've got to understand what the person you're trying to get buy-in from is really after. So kind of starting from that point and then working out actually what data reinforces the points that I'm making, or what data helps them to answer those questions they might have. That's the data that we should be showing. And then actually, what's the best visualization for that particular set of data? Is it they just need the raw data? Do they need it in a way that makes it a little bit more accessible for them? Do they need that data to tell them the story very quickly, in which case you might want something that's quite visual? Or actually, are they the sort of person who really wants to be able to interrogate that data themselves? They just need the data set narrowed down a little bit. So kind of getting into the shoes of the people that you're sharing that data with is probably the biggest priority with that. And then really looking at those kind of visualizations and how you are presenting them. So are you annotating data? So as an SEO, you've got a level of insight that other people won't necessarily have about that data. You've got a particular perspective on it that can be really valuable for them. But are you sharing that through the data that you're presenting? And it could just simply be annotating your graphs and charts, but actually saying that there's a downturn this particular month is actually due to seasonality, or we've noticed a drop in organic traffic to this page, but that's because a PPC campaign was turned on at the same time. That kind of insight is really, really valuable to people who perhaps don't have the knowledge or the time to look into the data in that way themselves. So making it useful for them is kind of helping them to connect the dots. But keeping it accurate is really about how you are choosing to show that data. And sometimes it could just be raw data, or sometimes it means presenting it in a visualization that's actually going to be easy for them to understand.
I don't think I've taken this many personal notes during a presentation, so this is fantastic. I know for me, I'm catching all my bad habits as you present. A couple of good ones in there too, but one thing I do is to think of all my data as very precious, and I want it all there because there are several stories. And I am figuring out the hard way that really, in order to present it in a useful way, what I need to do, hold back 95% of that, right? I need to be able to keep my data in a safe place on my desk, but then tell the story in a way where I'm not sending 14 slides to someone who I need to make a quick decision. So for those of us who are a bit sentimental with our data, what is a good strategy for taking that and just creating one data set, but maintaining all of the rest instead of just having that impulse to share everything?
Yeah, it's a strong impulse, isn't it? Especially when it's data that you're really proud of, because it's showing the work that you're doing is really paying off. It's really hard not to just bombard people with more information. But I mean, when I used to work agency side, I had many instances where I would send over a 14 slide data studio presentation to someone, and a week later when I phone them to have a chat about it, they tell me they still haven't opened it yet. And it's just overwhelming sometimes because there's too much data. So I always think less is more, and just select those key points and summarize is probably the best thing to do. Yes, you can present data with charts, you can present data with annotations, but actually, what do you want them to know, and what do you want them to take away from the data that you're showing them? So almost giving them the cheat sheet to the data. So, okay, I've got these lovely graphs and tables of information for you to look through, but actually, if you have 1 minute to digest all of this, this is what I want you to take away. And sometimes that's just bullet points, data that they can interrogate later on if they want to, but actually, what are the cliff notes of this? What do I need you to know from this data?
you know, I like seeing that if Google's doing TLDRs on their documentation, then it's something that obviously there's been some beta testing on, and that kind of stuff is really useful. I know there are some softwares that could do this, but I am very curious now. If we were to create a platform or use a platform in SEO where we would put our reports in and could come back as an industry and say, hey, these are the 5 different data types everyone had tried, and here are the number of clicks or views or actions that were taken. Wouldn't it be fantastic to hold our clients' feet to the fire a little bit, who said they went through it, and just find, you know, the first 2 pages or anything, and really gauge how useful we are? Data's our baby. I think my baby's beautiful. I would like to see if anyone else snap and gawked, right?
So there is actually a way that you can hook up your Data Studio report to Google Analytics and actually track your Data Studio report like a website and see what pages are actually visited. I can't speak to how, whether that's compliant with things like, I don't know, cookie policies and that sort of thing. So investigate and decide that on your own. But it is possible to actually to see who has visited what, well, not who, but whether certain pages of your Data Studio report have actually been visited or not. So that's quite illuminating if you do send one across to a client or a manager to actually see, have they read it or have they not?
Yeah, we could get one of the smart folks or smart companies that we have in this industry to build something and get some volunteers. I would love to see data across that, especially per region. That would be so useful. All right, so tell me how and why we should be using this data for people that aren't as passionate about SEO as we are.
Money, normally. We need buy-in. If you want budget for SEO, you need buy-in from other people. And just talking about how much you love Core Web Vitals is probably not going to do it for most people. So data and visualizing that data in a smart way is how you get buy-in. It's how you get budget as an agency. It's how you get resources as an in-house SEO. It's unfortunately always about money. You are always going to be competing with another team or another agency for that share of the pot. So really, the reason why we should be using visualization is to help support any business case that we're trying to make for SEO in our business. It should be about painting a picture that essentially replaces those 1,000 words. We're taking out the jargon that we're always likely to use as SEOs and replacing it with a story that is very visual and very obvious to someone who's perhaps not very SEO savvy. Images can often show the flow of a concept a lot better than just talking it through. So having a snapshot of data through a chart that you can then drill down into, or you can focus on a particular point with, is often going to do a job a lot better than you trying to explain some technical concept to someone who doesn't get it. I would caveat that with the fact that you do often need to wait for the right time to show the data. So again, you could show the results of a particular project that you've worked on straight away, but actually the results probably aren't going to tell the full story. They're not going to paint the full picture. It might be that you're going to have to wait a month or so to really find out the impact of the work that you've just done. So if you are looking to communicate the value of SEO, it might be that you actually have to wait a bit in order for that data to come through and really show the value that it's brought about. So unfortunately, patience is often a virtue with SEO, as we already know, but especially with the storytelling around SEO.
I picked the wrong career for that sort of thing. Patience is tough. I think you got in a good thing is SEOs don't usually have budget. We don't, I mean, rarely. It's evolving in a way that what I usually see are SEO teams are either aligned under marketing or we're aligned under development. Usually specific kinds of reports tend to help marketing get more money that way. But I've found that I need a totally different data set for teams that align under product and engineering or development in order to get budget that way. What would you recommend if I'm working with totally different stakeholders, maybe even 2 different stakeholders to decide my one budget? How should I approach segmenting my data? Do I want to send them the exact same data? Do I want to show them different pieces of the pie?
I would ask them what data they need to see. I'm a big advocate of actually going to the report recipient and saying, actually, what do you want to know? I can give you all of this information. I've got a lot of it in my hands, but actually, what do you need to know to make this decision? And giving them that data. It's really that simple. And chances are, as you said, it's actually not going to be the same set of data for both parties there. So taking that step back and going back to what we said at the beginning, actually, it's not just reporting on the data that you want them to know, but reporting on the data that they want to know.
Yeah, I like the outcome first approach there. What are you going to be doing the data? What decision is important to make, and how can I support that? I also like putting data in Google Data Studio so the different teams can toggle and see what you're reporting to each team as well. Big fan of transparency. We're all looking at, have access to similar data if there's the appetite for it. So we know we usually have to appeal to business owners, marketing, and development. What other audiences have you seen where you've had to cater to and apply data to that may not fall into your traditional three?
Colleagues within the SEO department, I would say. You oftentimes have to communicate, because it might be that you're actually having quite a different approach to a particular strategy, and it's very hard to speak to another SEO about SEO if they're quite set on their own strategy, because they've got years and years of experience in it and they might be quite set on their way. So actually trying to convey your own strategy with a set of data with someone who actually already knows how to interrogate that data themselves can be quite tricky. So we talk a lot about communicating SEO concepts to people who perhaps don't understand them, but it's equally important to be able to use data to communicate SEO concepts to people who do understand them, potentially in some instances understand them better than you do. And there's really no kind of fudging the numbers or hiding behind things when you are talking to someone who understands just as well as you do what that data is saying.
I like it. I had not even thought to position it that way, but I work on a team where most individuals have very specific specializations. And so getting their take on different data sets, or even just seeing what lights up their eyes, because usually data tells a story in some way. And I never know what small anecdote is going to cause someone to be like, I want to do this in this site, or now I'm really curious to see this play out. So that's awesome. I love it. All right. Tell me about the beautiful stuff, the principles. What should we be following? How can we be good citizens of data?
I would say make sure that whatever way you're presenting data, it would make sense to whoever's looking at it. And that's quite tricky to do. But if you think of a report going to a client or someone in another department, you don't know who else is going to see that report. Just because you send it to one person doesn't mean they're not going to then share it with someone else.
Sorry.
So actually,
I got too excited. I moved slides. Okay, let's continue.
Just making sure that data is presented in a way that anyone could really understand it is really important. And that's what I like to talk a lot about: annotation of graphs and making sure that you're labeling things really well. Maybe even having a bit of a glossary if you're visualizing something that perhaps not everyone understands, like, I don't know, core web vitals, for instance. It might be nice to just briefly explain what the different core web vitals are, so that someone who picks up a report who perhaps hasn't been as close to the work that you've been doing as the person you intended that report for still understands. Because it might be, for instance, you're sending over a report to your liaison at a client, but actually their boss, who's the ultimate budget holder, picks up that report. You may have been speaking to your particular stakeholder at the clients for ages about a particular project that you're working on, but their boss may never have heard about it. So sending over that report, giving enough context around the data that you're displaying that they can understand that you are worth the budget that they're paying, can be really valuable. So making sure that those charts, those graphs are really accessible to people. And actually something that we spoke about previously, Ashley, was about making the charts themselves accessible to everyone. And that might just be looking at things like making sure that they're screen reader friendly and taking into account color blindness. So looking at the colors that you're using when you're visualizing data is incredibly important. It's something that I have to keep reminding myself, and I'm really pleased that you actually brought it up in one of our previous discussions. It's really important to make sure that you are taking a step back and really analysing what you're showing and making sure that it tells the full story. So even things like providing context to why you're showing a particular set of data at that point in the report, or making it visually very easy to understand and digest. These are all kind of quite obvious but really important concepts when you're making data visualization accessible to people.
I think when you do want to make sure you're speaking to the right audience, you potentially risk pandering in a way. So just being aware that that report, especially if it's a good one, could be shared is obvious now, but not necessarily something I would have immediately thought about. So trying to think about, who else in their business could they pass it to, and would it be meaningful to them? I know you cannot be all things to all people. And you had mentioned the annotations and labeling the axes and just making sure things are super clear. That will get you, for everyone here, do that. That is a minimum. It will get you part of the way there if you are dealing with anyone, especially who is colorblind. But I think we should all push a little harder. It's tricky. I do not know myself. I don't know if you do what the proper set of colors that you could use, but obviously like red and green are pretty often confused. There's several different types of color blindness, but it would be nice to see standards on what types of colors we could help differentiate that create contrast on a chart.
Absolutely. I think you're right. It's something we should all be pushing to do more and challenging ourselves to do more.
I am lucky enough to have someone on my team who is colorblind who can take a look at a lot of the work that we do and say, don't get it, like not easy to read versus not. It's not the most uncommon thing. So you can have friends out there that are colorblind and lean on them and say thank you for their input. There are also lots of great Chrome plugins. So want to encourage everyone out there to just go give your data sets a test and see what it looks like through the eyes of others. Now, we also talked a little bit about accessibility in terms of if someone is vision impaired or has any other usability problem. Our next slide here is one that I'm really curious about because we talk about good platforms. So I'm going to lead in and say, do you know any data platform specifically that addresses this type of accessibility or that has a good way to bridge the gap? Or is this an opportunity for the market?
I don't know of any, actually. That's not to say none exist, but I'm not familiar with any in particular. But I would say it's a really important gap in the market if there isn't anything that properly addresses that. And it would be something that's so simple to implement, just a little tooltip or something when you're selecting colors, just to nudge you into making good decisions with that sort of thing. Or if you are changing the font size to quite a small font, just a little nudge there to say, actually, is this going to be readable given the size of your overall chart? I think it wouldn't be too difficult to implement, she says, having absolutely no coding ability whatsoever. But I'd like to think the concept is something that someone somewhere has tried working towards.
Well, a lot of our reports are visualized and owned by the browser, right? And since there are, WCAG recommendations and standards, and there are tips on how we can make all of our platforms accessible, I'm sure that there's a few good stepping stones. I just cannot think of one that gets me all the way across the path. And I think it's one of those things where we've thought a lot more about accessibility on websites. We've started to create that muscle memory in a really wonderful way. Until talking with you and brainstorming live, I had not really thought about my data that I report back to clients in that way, or I report back internally. All right.
It's not necessarily for the programs themselves to be completely bulletproof with that sort of thing, but actually about us taking personal ownership over the data and the way that we're presenting it and having a bit of responsibility around that. Just, that second of before you click send of, is this going to be understandable for anyone who happens to see this report, and kind of putting that into your own checks and balances, your own process to make sure what you're providing, what you're presenting is going to be accessible to everyone.
That's a good point. A quick reminder to folks that are on the panel, we do have some time for Q&A, so if you want to drop some in, please feel free. You've got a few more minutes before we get there. Helen and I will also be on Twitter a bit afterward and see if we can catch any other good questions. Now, what are some good platforms that you like? What are the most helpful ones for beginners or advanced? What do you keep in your back pocket? Where should I start?
I am always going to plug Google Data Studio, and that's not just because it's accessible for people who are new to visualizing data, but it's actually really good for people who are receiving reports. Sometimes if you send over a report with an interface that someone's not familiar with, they just don't want to even try it. I'm thinking of people who perhaps don't spend their entire day in data, or don't spend their entire day on computers. Even if you're sending over a report to the owner of a business and actually, they don't spend a huge amount of time in the office, they're out and about doing things. When you're trying to convey data, you've got to think of a platform that's quite intuitive, and Data Studio is that. Most people have used a Google product of some sort in the past, and so they can probably get through a Google Data Studio report that you send over. But it's also just really good if you're new to visualizing data yourself. It's something that you can easily have a good play around with. It connects easily to a lot of the data sources that you're probably using, and people are creating connectors all the time. So I always plug Data Studio. And I'm going to say it, Excel. I mean, it's not glamorous, but you can put data in it and you can get charts out of it. So if you're really wanting a beginner platform to access data visualization, then just get used to creating charts in Excel, because that's where you learn principles of things like adding labels and axes and all that sort of thing. So yeah, it's not glamorous, but it does a job.
I'm an often work harder, not smarter person. Unfortunately, I did not get that memo on early in life, and Excel has been really useful for me because I find that if I automate it too much, I don't spend the time really getting to know the data and asking the questions I need to get through that process.
Absolutely. Sometimes it is the...
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say that that's so true, that sometimes it's the act of you spending ages faffing around with data and putting it into a table and getting a chart out at the end. Actually, that causes you to really interrogate the data. If you are just running automated reports all the time, the temptation is there to just not actually have a look at the data properly and just to click report and you've got one created for you. So sometimes, although it is very manual, it's good to spend a little bit of time going through the data so that you really know that you understand the report that you're sending over.
Yeah, I dig it. I'm glad that you mentioned the Excel, because for folks that aren't living and breathing the data, but it's important to you in your job or could inspire you to do more work. Every time I just give myself an unstructured hour to go look at a client's data, I get, I find 4 things that I'm really excited to fix or talk about. So it's nice to know that there's a lot of room and value in going about it that meandering way to truly understand it and let that inform how you build out your really fabulous automated reports. I will also plug in here. I'll see if I can add the link soon, or if someone on the call wants to add it. Y'all are wicked clever, but Google has, I think it's just called a professional certification or something through Coursera that is a data analytics or data visualization course that's pretty fantastic. And it gets a little more into that automation, Python, things like that. But if anyone is looking for a way to kind of go to the next level, especially with tools that are so familiar, I hate to feed the monopoly, but at the same time, familiarity breeds likeness. But that is a really good sort of boot camp for some of this. Now, outside of Google and Excel, are there any other platforms that you like for specific reasons, or any platforms you'd like to see built?
I mean, I only discovered this today, but I like what I saw, and that's a tool called Flourish, which seemed to have some really good integrations, but also really good ways of visualizing data that were quite exciting. But as I say, I only discovered it today and haven't had a huge amount of time to play around with it. But I'm excited to dig into that in a bit more detail. And then, of course, I can't really talk about data and SEO without mentioning Python, because it is the flavor of the month or year, should I say. Python can go a long, long way in helping you get through data and manipulating data and making it, putting it into a format that you can then report on. So I am by no means Python advanced in any way, but the more that I speak to my colleagues who are, the more I get excited to learn it, because actually there's so much you can do with Python that helps with data manipulation.
It used to feel like this abstract, sexy term that a lot of us were talking about and most of us were understanding, or maybe just me, I was not getting it, right? The pieces were not coming together immediately. But I see SEO as doing this evolution more into larger web analytics, and we have greater data sets now and bigger sites and more robust features and things that are harder to gather. So I see Python going from this sexy, oh, I'm going to regret saying that someday, that Python is sexy. I understand now why I don't get invited to a lot of social events, but it went from this really sexy kind of elusive thing to now it's becoming very utilitarian and allowing us to access those large data sets And it's having this value that I think is helping the entire industry evolve into just understanding data and acting on data, which it excites me. It's a tool that we were using sparingly. Oh, my phone is, I said the G word, so it's talking, apologies. It went from being something that we used sparingly and that we talked about, and we loved having specializations, but now on our team, every person we interview, we just talk to them about their experience or their appetite to learn. So this feels like a data renaissance in the next 2 years. Let's do it. I am so excited. Optimism.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Everyone kind of either jumped on Python when it was first sort of talked about in the industry, or went the other direction and thought, oh no, it's just a flash in the pan. But actually, I think we are starting to see it become a staple in our SEO toolkit. So yes, I need to stop putting off learning it properly. I need to just get to grips with it.
My team, we're doing some group learnings and financial incentives to learn Python. Other companies might consider that a team learning is great. I don't need anyone to do it on their own, and accountability is fantastic. So maybe what we all need to do as an industry is have some study groups and then collectively go and make sure that that new skill is represented in the salaries that we ask for. It's really valuable.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. This is the last slide before Q&A, so let's give this a few minutes, but this is you. This is what are some tips? Like, I get into this, I'm elbow deep, I'm getting excited about the visualization, I'm thinking about my audience. What are some quick hits you can leave me with to make the most of all of these things that I'm putting effort into?
I would say use your data and your visualizations of that data as marketing collateral. At the end of the day, we are marketers as SEOs. We should be able to present data in a way that makes a compelling case for something. So keep that in mind. Why are you reporting? Because people seem to really hate reporting. Whenever I've worked agency side, it's kind of been called Hell Week and all sorts of things whenever you're churning out reports for your clients, because it can be quite arduous. But I see it as an opportunity to actually reinforce value. So every report that you send, whether it's to a colleague or a boss or a client or your boss's boss, think of it as marketing collateral that is proving your worth as an SEO, proving the value of SEO in general, and essentially allowing you to keep any budget or even grow a budget so that you are getting to do more exciting and interesting things with your SEO work. So just whenever you're sending out a report, don't think of it as just churning out data and something on your to-do list that you've got to check off, but actually it's your opportunity to really show off what you've been achieving. So think of it as marketing in its own right. And then also, whenever you're sending across any kind of data, if you want to make the most of it, you need to have a so what in there. So here's your chart. This is what I want you to learn from it. So what? Or this is the so what. I want you to implement this. I want you to consider doing this. I want to have your sign off on this thing. Make sure that every piece of data that you send across, every visualization, chart, graph that you send across has some kind of call to action with it. Otherwise, what's the point? It's you want that data there to tell a story and to compel people to act, essentially. Otherwise, it is just pointless data that you're sending across.
Yeah. So what's next? Like, it's just something to where you're not just leaving that. I like that. I think it puts accountability on us for following up with that data too. Okay. Any other tips before I jump to a few questions we have?
Oh, no, I'm excited for Q&A.
Oh, all right. Let's see. I have a question from Shanti, who is one of my new friends in the industry and quite a fabulous human being, but I don't need to feed his ego on here. However, here's his question. Are there any types of more advanced graphs that Helen prefers when showing SEO rankings over time? For instance, volumetric display of branded keywords versus unbranded keywords in GDS.
I wouldn't say there's anything I particularly think this is the way to present the data, but I do like the idea of separating out brand and non-branded keywords, and also just looking at segmenting those even further. I think we can kind of gloss over a lot of what's going on with our rankings if we just kind of lump a lot of keywords in together. So going really granular is probably what I would recommend. But in terms of how you actually present that, I think you need to go back to actually who is my audience and what do they need to know. And I think the visualization will come from that.
I think from my experience, the branded versus non-branded, I really love in GDS when you have a site that has a strong brand. It may be something like, let's say you have a department store, let's say you're looking at Macy's. Fantastic, we know you're getting traffic from Macy's, but what percentage is non-branded? Because that's where the potential is. I don't need to spend a lot of work on ranking for your brand term. So I like that question from Shanti. We've done some of that in Data Studio at Deep Crawl. Like GSC and GDS play really beautiful together with those sorts of data sets. All right, got a question from Michael. So he's asking how to display the cause of SEO traffic increases. Let's see, he says because of seasonal or external causes or because SEO traffic increased due to the efforts. So I guess that's how do you kind of break down and be able to tell a story of what you're in control of and what you're not?
Yeah, really good question. I think firstly, you have to actually understand the data. You've got to dig into the data and then present what you find. So I don't think any top level graph is ever going to tell you that. You've got to really go granular with it. So whenever I'm trying to work out what is the cause of a dip, I like to exclude things. So actually, could it be seasonality? Yes or no? Could it be the launch of a new product? Yes or no? Could it be the activity of another marketing channel? Have PPC campaigns suddenly been turned on, or have we ramped up communication on social media? Has that impacted organic traffic? And really kind of work through what could it be, what couldn't it be, and try to narrow that down. And then once you've done that, you can start looking at how to present your findings in a way that is going to tell that story. And it might well be that you actually present your data in that exclusionary process. So actually, here's all of the marketing channels. This is how I know that it's not an effect of those. Or here's all of our seasonality data. This is how I know that this isn't a result of seasonality. And you can kind of use a variety of different charts to kind of go through that process and take people on that journey with you until you get to that end result of actually, it's probably the SEO work that we've done, or actually it might well be the impact of an algorithm update. But kind of bringing people through that journey with you, I think is really important.
Yeah, it's quite a bit of documentation too, because find that we have to notate changes on our site or changes in what is going on the platform alongside changes that Google has brought up, or even a new competitor, right? You can be doing fine. Your rankings may drop because of a new kid on the block. So I like adding that notation and being able to say, this is why I looked at this data and what it could say. Seasonality is fabulous, but COVID really mucked up my seasonality charts. And so I have found myself going back on e-com clients to chart sales that they would normally do during what times of the year, because that was my normal. You may have a summer sale every June. Maybe that didn't happen, or maybe it was pushed earlier because of COVID and because of the need to push certain products. So like seasonality I love, but boy, has it been a labor of love to pull that into and consider that with the data right now. We've also seen publishers who report on finances in the news. Their traffic obviously looked a lot different during COVID than it did before. All right, I have one more question here. And I first read the name as Caitlin, but I think it's Catalin. I am so sorry if I mispronounce your name. I am from that blank, horrible middle spot in America. We are not fancy with our words. But regarding the data visualization, do you use to segment non-brand organic traffic, brand traffic, and non-brand revenue versus brand revenue? So I'm thinking like, it sounds like she's asking about when you're visualizing data, love seeing that brand versus non-branded traffic. Do you ever separate and show branded versus non-branded revenue?
Yeah, I like to go as granular as possible with information if I think it's going to help either prove the point that I'm trying to make with the data, or it's going to open up possibilities with the data. So for instance, if I'm looking at trying to increase budget, for instance, what will it helps to be able to break out, actually this is branded traffic and branded revenue, and this is non-branded traffic and non-branded revenue, because the likelihood is SEO is going to be impacting that non-branded traffic and revenue the most. So I want to be able to show you that actually that's where I'm having an impact. Sometimes if you just lump all this data together, you kind of lose that visibility over stuff. So the more granular you can go with it, the more likely you are to be able to show the value of SEO.
That makes a lot of sense. So we're not taking any more Q&As. I've taken you to time. I thought of one thing I would love to throw out there as a question we don't have to answer today, but maybe if folks can think about it and get back to me. Now I'm very curious, but when we were talking earlier about bias, I think a lot about how technology is really centered around technologists. Algorithms are really just reflections of the people that write them. So junk in, junk out. So I'm wondering if there's any way to approach existing traffic on a site and their buying patterns or demographics with something more general, whether it's in a different geographical location or different age, because I look at data a lot and I go, great, I've got this behavior, they're coming from here, but that's only telling me the story of people that are already coming to the site. So now I'm very curious about how we can use data visualization to consider larger groups of people or some intersectional groups of specific people I need to reach out to or I'm not resonating with. So data visualization on the site versus how can we visualize our performance versus the what if out there? Who are we ignoring or who are we not appealing to? So I've just given myself something to think about on my family road trip. I'm sure that my husband and kids are going to love me processing this out loud. But yes, okay. Anyone get back? All right, I'm excited about that one. I'm going to follow up with that one. And Helen, if you have ideas, I want to hear every single one of them. But I am going to go ahead and, oh, look, there we go. Q&A, apologize. We were there. So next steps from our side, reach out to me at Deep Crawl. We have a good marketing team. We have some ebooks that were just published. So Guide to UX, CRO, and SEO. So everything with page experience. And then a deep dive on core web vitals. So lots of good content written there. And then our next webinar is in just a few weeks on why marketing leaders need to invest in SEO. Let's get that money. I said SEOs usually don't have the budget, but I'm happy to encourage folks with money to help. You'll get a quick survey after this. So again, if you can, just give us a little bit of feedback. We're doing more webinars that we see as a lot more community oriented. I want to talk to other tech SEOs and other folks in the industry. That's what fills my cup. So anything you can put back in the survey that can help us shape this to be useful would be fantastic. Right, Helen, any final words from you?
No, just to say thank you for having me. It's been really, big honor to be able to talk about data and SEO in a bit more detail. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming. Time is valuable, and it has been an absolute delight on this end. You can catch us both and harass us both on Twitter, and I hope everyone has a really good rest of your week. Thanks, gang.